OK, well, we've just heard from the politicians there, but now it is your turn. We're live and we're ready to hear from you on Raw Politics. Your call.
Thanks for joining us and a warm welcome. We're broadcasting here from the European Parliament in Brussels. This is Raw Politics, your call, your turn to get on the phone, get on Skype or get to Twitter and Facebook and have yourself heard. The first question we're putting to you tonight: should gender parity be mandatory in politics? It's International Women's Day this Friday, and on that note, a new report has come out today here in the European Parliament in Brussels, highlighting that still only 36% of this Parliament is made up of women, and there's only 9 female commissioners out of 28. So we're asking you, should gender parity be mandatory in politics?
Or maybe you don't think that at all. Maybe you think that actually things should just go as they are, and that maybe having female representation doesn't make that much difference to our politics. You vote on people because of their political persuasion, not necessarily the gender. Do please get in touch. Also, did Russia escape justice? It is a year on since the Salisbury attack. Yes, we have had sanctions. Yes, there have been expulsions from the UK. But ultimately, has Russia really paid the high price?
Unsolved mystery. And the third question we're putting to you tonight is: are people forgetting the Holocaust, that dark period in Germany and Europe's history? We're asking you that because over in Greece we've seen an escape room attract criticism from a number of Jewish organisations after they mirrored the game after the Holocaust itself. So we're asking you tonight, are people forgetting the Holocaust?
Pretty distasteful stuff, at least I think. What do you think? Pick up the phone, the number, you know it by now, surely, and it's free. It's 00800 333 3700 2. Look at that, Victoria already on the phones, scribbling down some notes. They're in the basement of the Parliament. If nothing else, you get a chance to talk to them. Do give us a call. Email us at rawpoll@euronews.com. Connect via Skype, or also get on the social media, Twitter and Facebook. Use the hashtag #RawPolitics. And
after you go via Victoria and Philip down in our control room, you'll be joined by our 2 commentators here tonight. We have Andrew Byrne, he's EU correspondent for the Sunday Times and a regular face, of course, on Raw Politics, and as is Kathleen Van Bremt, a Belgian MEP with the Socialists and Democrats. Welcome to the show, and it's your first time to be on your call, so
in this part of the programme, absolutely. So I'm very excited.
Yeah, we're interested to hear.
We're all very excited.
And to hear your comments on International Women's Day and all the stats and facts.
We're even more excited, though, to get the very latest news this hour. Let's join Isabel, who's at Euronews headquarters in Lyon. Isabel.
Good evening, Darren and Maeve. Our top stories. Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido has returned to Caracas after a tour of Latin America and is calling for protests against President Nicolas Maduro in the days ahead. Mr. Guaido was met by his supporters at the airport after gathering support abroad for his campaign to oust the Maduro government. The country's Supreme Court had placed a travel ban on Guaido. Demonstrations against Algerian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika are intensifying. Early today, a former government minister and member of the ruling FLN resigned as a lawmaker in a rare sign of discontent within the governing elite. Tens of thousands of people have taken part in days of protests against Mr. Bouteflika's decision to stand for a 5th time in next month's election. And French President Emmanuel Macron has called for reconciliation with Italy and an end to the diplomatic clashes that have dogged the 2 European powers for months. Mr. Macron was interviewed on Italian television on Sunday. Tensions peaked in February when the French government recalled its ambassador to Rome in response to verbal attacks from leaders in Italy's populist coalition government. Well, those are our top stories now. Back over to you, Darren and Maeve in Brussels.
Isabel, thank you very much. A full news bulletin coming up at the top of the hour. Now, we are starting on this question tonight of should gender parity be mandatory in politics. It is International Women's Day later on this week, I think on Friday. Clearly, it's an evocative and emotive issue for many people, not least of all women who feel that they are not properly represented in politics. But the question is, should it be mandatory? Essentially, should we make a concerted effort to try and make this happen? And when we have asked this question of people, and you can still vote, it's on our Facebook page or on Twitter, should gender parity be made mandatory in politics? 65%, 2 out of 3 of you are saying no. No, it shouldn't.
Well, let's ask our panellists and see what they think. I'm just going to start with Kathleen, perhaps, our female panellist.
Well, let me start by saying nobody is really in favor of a mandatory system or quota, but you have to ask yourself, what is an efficient tool to get more and better representation in political life? I myself, when I was a minister back home in the regional government, together with a colleague, I made the list for local elections, mandatory half women, half men on the list. We have that now fully in Belgium for any, whether it's for the European elections, for the national. You need to have parity on the list, but not only that, because then the powerful men still get the top. So we also have that on the top. When you have a man at the first, then you need a woman at the second. So it's a combined system, and it has really worked. In Belgium, we have now a very high representative of women. And my party, the Socialist Party in the Flemish part, we used to be really male-dominated. There's a lot of other political parties. And today, for the elections coming up, the European, the federal and the regional elections in May, we have more female top one candidates than we have men today.
But the question is, why is that a good thing?
Because it's just efficient, you know. Everybody knows by now how it works. When you have a male-dominated system as a political system and many other systems, there's a sort of atmosphere and culture that men tend to help younger men to get into political life, and it's much. Why has women? It took women for more than half of a century to climb up that ladder so slowly. It's just an efficient way of dealing with it, and now it works the other way around. Now sometimes we need to find men to come into places, and don't come up with the argument that. Just vote for the most. How do you say the most
competent?
Yeah, the one who's. But more than half of the population is women. By now we know at the university,
21%.
most of the women graduating in university are more women than men, and still all the professors are male. Still in Belgium, all the well, not all, but most, majority are male.
When it comes to politics, and we do want you to call on this, pick up the phone, the number, it should be on your screen, 00800 333 3700 2. But people still, men and women, they don't vote on people's gender, do they? They don't vote for a candidate just because they happen to be a woman?
Sometimes they do. But no, but it's, if there's no, if on the list there are only male politicians, what can you do? Then just vote for the male politicians.
My question would be,
make sure that you have
what is the outcome? I mean, with this improved representation for women, say, in Flanders or in Belgium, what are the improved outcomes? Is there better outcomes for women in terms of healthcare provision or education or employment rights?
Gender pay gap being addressed.
No, but that's not the issue.
No, because the output matters too. It's not just about the input and representation. It's about what is the outcome.
No. Look at any study, when it's, whether it's about efficiency of companies, board of directors, how an organization functions, whatever. If you have diversity in your management team, if you have diversity in your board of directors, you have a better organization.
Yeah, I mean, I buy that in principle, in theory, but I'm just curious.
And in political life, it's not difficult.
Outcomes, can you point to specific things that have improved for women in Belgium because of this increased representation? Well, because I buy it in theory, I totally buy it. I'm just interested in reality.
But it's not only theory, it's about having a better political system, But when you look to some of the issues that we've been interested in Belgium, so we have a very progressive euthanasia law, a very progressive... and that's mainly been the work of many women working on these issues. But it's not... I'm not saying that only women will take care of childcare.
Sure.
We also have men, and rightly so. That's not the issue. The issue is you have a better political system if you have more diversity, and that goes way beyond gender.
No, because of course it does, and many would point to the lack of diversity in this parliament, not just based on
absolutely.
Gender. Gary getting in touch saying many a good person has been held back due to race, religion or gender when all that matters is what is between their ears.
Between their ears.
Yeah.
Kathleen, I'm curious to know what it's like being a woman here in the European Parliament. Do you feel like what that study would suggest, underrepresented?
No, I do not personally, but because I have a long standing already political life, and I've been a minister. I feel really very confident in the things that I do. And
you don't feel undermined ever by...
Absolutely not. But when I was young, when I started off in political life, I did. I was impressed, but also sometimes intimidated by male colleagues. And also in that sense, it's really very important that you're not standing there on your own. And when you're a young woman, you come into political life and you're not many other women are around, it's more difficult. So it also helps to make sure that you can get your way through. Now I can stand my man.
Yeah, but the situation obviously here in Belgium is exceptional. Here is the situation you described Sweden as well?
Yeah, Sweden, the Netherlands, I think. Well, when you look to the north, if you look to the south of Europe, you see more problematic situations.
Yeah, let's look at Hungary. Let's look at Romania, Bulgaria. And then that's when the question that we're asking needs to come into place, which is essentially, you know, does something mandatory need to be done? Because sometimes if you don't force an issue, it's not likely to change.
Well, I mean, it's the one thing that does work is quotas in selection processes in Belgium, and it's been introduced in Ireland lately as well. It does work. It does increase representation. But I mean, you mentioned the Hungary example. In Hungary, I think it's 9% of MPs are women. Yeah. I think there's one cabinet member who's a woman. I think she's the Minister for Families. And Viktor Orban, his view, and obviously it's shared by a lot of Hungarian voters, is that politics is just too brutal for women, that it's a man's game. Women are delicate creatures.
Well, look at Theresa May.
What do you think of that? What do you think of that?
So that's the Hungarian perspective.
Call in. Please do, as they pick up the phone, 00800 333 3700 Also talking tonight about Russia, actually. What we are 1 year on from the attack in Salisbury. That saw Novichok used on UK soil. Now, most intelligence agencies around the world suspect that Russia, potentially even Vladimir Putin, was behind the attack. In the immediate aftermath, we saw the expulsion of Russian diplomats from London, further sanctions on Russian officials. But 1 year on, the geopolitics really hasn't changed very much. And the question is, did Russia escape justice? Did the two men suspected of carrying out this attack escape justice? What do you think, Andrew?
Well, I mean, obviously, clearly the two men who perpetrated the attack, and, you know, call me a cynic, but I don't think...
The men who were looking at spies.
I don't think the two Russian military intelligence officers who arrived in Salisbury were just there for the church architecture. So clearly they escaped justice because they're now back in Russia, and there's, as far as I'm aware, there's no process to prosecute them. And I think, I mean, in a way, people always say, well, the sanctions against Russia, whether it was for the Skripal case or whether it was for the Crimea annexation, didn't work because Russia hasn't pulled back from Crimea and Russia still doesn't accept responsibility. And that may be true, but I think that's not an argument against sanctions. I think that's an argument for smarter sanctions, more targeted sanctions. And Bill Browder, who's a big advocate for smart sanctions that tackle Russia in the financial infrastructure side of things, I think he says we need to rethink how to be more effective with them. And I think that's a compelling argument.
And what about you, Catherine? What do you think?
Well, the problem is that we don't know for sure who's behind what.
Oh, come on, really?
No. Look, I'm not going to defend Putin. I'm not going to defend Russia. But I think, as Europeans, we could be much more smarter. And there's of course the issue of sanctions. But if you, on the one hand, have sanctions, and on the other hand, you are much more bound to Russia because you need their gas, for instance. We had a whole issue with a new gas pipeline that needs to be built. Well, I'm absolutely against it, and I think it's mainly Germany that wants it. What sort of hypocrites are we in imposing sanctions, and at the same time we are connecting ourselves so much to Russia because we need their gas? Let's make sure that we are independent of their gas. I think that's much more smart thing to do when you look to the relationships that we have with Russia.
We should all try fracking, which is
no, I'm against fracking.
Well, it's made the United States incredibly energy self-sufficient.
What I want to say is let's go into 100% renewable energy by 2050.
I'm sure that will arise a lot of people on their couch.
But there's no question about, you look at Russia and you look at what they've allegedly at least done.
Yes.
Been involved in shooting down a passenger aircraft, trying to distort a referendum campaign in Macedonia, a possible attempt to coup.
Elections in the US.
In Montenegro. Interference potentially even in EU elections. the annexation of Crimea. And indeed of parts of Georgia. I mean, like, how much more does Russia have to do? Like, it gets to the point where you're right. We just impose more sanctions. Nothing really seems to change. The geopolitical needle doesn't seem to move, and it must give Putin this sense that actually he can really escape justice by doing pretty much what he wants.
Yeah, but the problem with foreign policy of Europe is double, of course. The one is well known because we do not have a unity on what we should do. We do whatever in all sorts of. If you look to Venezuela, for instance, the same. So that's first. It's more general than Russia. But if we would have a European Union to speak with one voice, it would be much stronger. And the second issue is that's why I gave the example of energy and also other issues. If Russia can no longer rely on the income they have from their gas, from their fossil fuels, then it will be a completely other relationship that we can have. So I just want us to be much more comprehensive and much more in line with the. It's not just about sanctions.
Just quickly, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, I think in understanding Vladimir Putin, I think you have to understand that this kind of geopolitical clash and conflict, this constant rising tensions, suits and serves his domestic political narrative, because Russia is a country with declining incomes. Its economic prospects are extremely poor, and in a context where you have no sort of alternative, constructive economic narrative to give to your citizens, what else can you resort to but a kind of a nationalistic rhetoric of conflict? And that's, I think, why we'll continue to see more of this kind of bellicose rhetoric.
Anyway, we want to hear from you. We've had enough of those two. What do you think at home? We're getting some tweets in about the gender equality. David saying gender equality is hardly an issue where humans automatically achieve the ideal state. That's why I'm happy that in my country we have parties who impose gender parity on themselves for candidates. Essentially, that there are
Where is he
lists
from?
For candidates. From Germany.
And meanwhile, we've got Zenk here on Facebook who's asking us to not all speak at the same time.
Right. Sorry.
Thank you for that, Zenk. But we're trying to raise a bit of debate here, so.
Anyway, well, why don't you call in and you can talk over us? 00800 333 37002. We're going to be back after this quick break. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Your call tonight, we're asking you about gender parity. Should it be mandatory in politics? Did Russia escape justice, 1 year on from the Salisbury attack in England? And are people forgetting the Holocaust? Pick up the phone 00800 333 3702, or at the very least, drop us a tweet or a Facebook message using the hashtag Raw Politics. Now, on the Holocaust issue, lots of people are tweeting about that. Patricia's saying, shocking to read about my hometown having this game, which we'll explain in a second. Us who are older remember the Holocaust, and that it should be stopped. Someone else called Salisa saying it seems like this next generation is too distant from the horrors of the Holocaust to feel any sympathy, like it's just a funny symbol to them, that this should not be a joke. And finally, someone else tweeting and said, regardless, it shouldn't be played and definitely shouldn't have been blasted all over social media. Plus, to them, it wasn't a game. They were legitimately joking about the Holocaust, which millions died in. Not okay. So what's the story?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's an article here in Deutsche Welle saying that in a country that thrives on anti-Semitism, i.e. Greece, it's describing this Holocaust-themed game offered by an escape room company as an undeniably entertaining adventure. I mean, I don't know what our panellists think of that. Do you think it's distasteful, or do you think...
Yeah, I mean, I think it does seem to me kind of beyond the pale of what is acceptable, and I think, the evidence is that across Europe there's an increasing numbers of anti-Semitic attacks, vandalism attacks on synagogues, and so...
Isn't this the crux of the question, though? Is the question that actually this is people who are now so distant from the Holocaust that the horrors of it are not as profound to them, and so it's not out of malice, rather out of kind of just ignorance, or is it linked to kind of a sense of anti-Semitism?
Well, I don't know. In this case, I haven't seen this escape room, but I do think there is an issue around education in the Holocaust, and I think the there have been some surveys lately about awareness of the Holocaust and belief in kind of Holocaust denial, conspiracy theories that suggest that they're growing. So,
well, funny enough, you mentioned that. Actually, I was reading polls that anti-Semitism is quite high in Greece for that very reason, because people do tend to believe there in a lot of conspiracy.
The denialism, yeah.
A lot of those linked as well to the Greek Orthodox Church.
Yeah. So, obviously, the obvious answer how you address this stuff is education, but that's obviously not enough in itself. And there's something more sinister happening across Europe. You saw the big protests in Paris lately against anti-Semitism, and I think the French government has taken a strong stand against it. You're seeing in the UK, the Labour Party is now going through an internal struggle to address what one departing MP called institutional anti-Semitism. And it's kind of crazy for me. I kind of grew up thinking this was the kind of attitudes and prejudices that we would never really tolerate again. And so to see it seeping back into discourse is really troubling.
And we saw a report out just a couple of weeks ago, I think we reported on it here on Raw Politics, that the Fundamental Rights Agency brought out saying the amount of people who had suffered harassment attacks of members of the Jewish community had increased especially
it's up massively, yeah. In France, the number of anti-Semitic attacks are up 86% in the space of 1 year. But this could just be a simple case of ignorance. And there is a question about, well, isn't there a question, though, at what point in history do we move away? There are games about all sorts of stuff, terrible things happened in the past, but at a certain point, kind of, humanity and history moves on.
I tend to disagree.
Okay.
We are here in the European Parliament. We had a survivor of the Holocaust speaking in the plenary not just a few weeks ago, and she said how proud she was to be here in the center of European democracy, how important that was. This institution is built on the disaster and the outrageous horror of the Holocaust and the Second World War. And of course, the distance will become bigger. I'm too young. I haven't experienced it. My father was like 7, 8 years old when he had to flee Antwerp because of the bombing at the end of the Second World War. But at the same time, we're still discovering a lot of issues on that team in Antwerp. And I want to give it as an example because then you have a public debate, and that is extremely important. It's education, but also the public debate. We had a very important professor writing a book on the role of the mayor of Antwerp during the Second World War and what happened in Antwerp. We have still have a very large community, Jewish community, and there were you call it in English pogroms, and now we know that the Antwerp mayor wasn't just shying away, he was helping. The Antwerp police were part of it. And he is called Delweide, and he still has an important part in the harbour of Antwerp. A dock is named after him. We changed that to prove to people that we will not accept that. So it's extremely important to still talk about it. I have an 11-year-old daughter. I talk with her. It's education, it's public debate, and it's... There cannot be just ignorance. There cannot be just ignorance.
But it cannot just be ignorance, but kind of that familial link that you have with the Second World War, i.e. with your dad who lived through it, clearly for generations to come, that will not be the case. And so these things do mean less, as in, it's not just anti-Semitism, but, the question of Europe being at war will seem such a distant thing that it becomes potentially more likely because of that.
Well, I think the key to it is exactly what you were just saying, which is, but I think in terms of educating people about the Holocaust, it's about finding the historical facts of how it happened in particular areas, how it happened in Antwerp, because people, they can understand it, I think, a bit more if they realise this was something that happened on my street. And I think that the example of Antwerp, the mayor, and that research that has come to light is an example that can resonate with people, even if they don't have that family link, to have that link with how it happened in their area. And a great example of that is you see, in many European cities, these stumbling stones, these Stolpersteine in the street. And the guy who came up with this great idea, which was to put in the pavement outside the homes of Jews who were killed, to put their names and details on the stumbling stones in the street so people could see that this wasn't just an abstract thing that happened in a concentration camp, but there was someone in their street where they lived who was deported and killed. And I think it's those kind of stories that are going to be impactful.
But then you look at, you talk about collaboration, and you look at what Benjamin Netanyahu and what some of the Israelis said about the Polish and Polish people's role in the war, and that created this massive diplomatic spat between those countries. And again, it comes back to this point of, Europe. How willing is Europe to reconcile with its history as well? That yes, there were a lot of people who tried to stop things like the Holocaust, but there were a lot of collaborators too.
Yes, but that makes it so interesting to discuss it. I often ask myself, because not only the professor wrote a book, there was also an author that wrote a book about the same time in Antwerp. I often ask myself, what if I were an Antwerp police man, because there were not so many police women? Because you always have like a few people that are really extremely courageous, but not everybody's that courageous, and that's okay. And then there's a few people, a few percent that is really extremely violent and anti-Semitic, and then you have the ones in the middle. It's them that you need to talk about, not with your fingers in that sense, because they were forced by the mayor to be there to do the pogroms. But what would you and me have done? That's the real discussion that we need.
It is, but it's also a question where I think if we were asked to take part in a Holocaust escape room game, whether it be in Greece or elsewhere, we most certainly say no. But what do you think?
Have you ever been in an escape room?
I have done it. I have done an escape room. It was an Egyptian-themed one, I can say, which is certainly a very long time in history. But anyway, what do you think? Are we forgetting the Holocaust? Those survivors, there are fewer of them. The familial ties with the Second World War, even here on the continent, are fading. And thus, are we forgetting the Holocaust? We want your views on that. But also, lots of people getting in touch about the women equality issue. Irene saying, having to justify why it's rewarding, profitable to have more women on boards of political parties or companies tells you itself how much there still has to be done for women equality. Never heard what is the value of having a man as a representative. Good point, interesting point. What is the value of having a man? I don't know.
Yeah, good question.
Maybe I would ask you that question.
Well, I'm just going to time to answer and read out in the next week.
Okay. Anyway, join us after the break, while you can also ask questions of what's the purpose of us indeed, by picking up the telephone on 00800 333 3702 or use the hashtag #RawPolitics. Join us in a couple of minutes.
Any comment here? Good day. Yeah.
Welcome back to Raw Politics. Your call, we want you to pick up the phone. We're still on air for another 50 minutes. 00800 333 3702, or you can email us rawpol@euronews.com. Should gender parity be mandatory in politics? Are people forgetting the Holocaust? And did Russia escape justice? On that issue, what are people saying?
On Facebook, Darren, a guy called Chris Georgiev, thank you so much for your comment there. He says, I do not believe that the Russians are innocent, but hey, he says, wasn't 007 something like the national pride of the UK? But of course, it's only a movie. But everyone should know that the secret services from all over the world are proud until someone didn't screw them in the Skripal way.
Didn't screw them up in the Skripal way. There you go. This, of course, is marking the one-year anniversary since the attack in Salisbury, which saw the expulsion of Russian diplomats, sanctions imposed by many European countries and the United States. But the question, of course, is has Russia essentially faced justice when it comes to this issue, and indeed a whole range of other issues as well. What's Barclay saying?
Barclay's on a bit of a ramble there. It's a bit too long, perhaps, to read out. But
go on. Sub-paragraph, it's saying that on Russian actions in Crimea, they had to choose actions because of the situation with the Crimea and Ukraine. The Crimea is part of the EU, eventually part of NATO, a very compromised position strategically, military, and economically.
See, people tend to comment without full stops. So
the point is that actually, when you look at this, and this is from a Russian point of view, they would say that something like Crimea and Georgia, that is also their sphere of influence.
Yeah, well,
and that the EU
what do you want to say there, Andrew?
is contravening in their sphere.
Yeah, I mean, and we heard this point. I mean, I think the commenter said, if Crimea becomes part of NATO, then that's it had to become part of NATO. But of course, I mean, NATO expansion into Ukraine was never really a serious prospect. I mean, there was an EU association agreement with Ukraine, but the idea of actual NATO accession, I don't think was really a real prospect.
Okay, we remember those fascinating times a couple of years ago. Let's take a caller there, Andrew, and then we'll get you back there. We've got Prest from the Netherlands. Thanks so much for calling us in tonight. Our first caller. I think people are feeling a little bit shy tonight. But Prest, did Russia escape justice, do you think?
Excuse me? Sorry?
Do you think that Russia escaped justice?
I'm not going to put it in that way because I have a different view. Because I don't think Russia should be blamed.
Okay.
Because, let me just explain a bit. There is a man came on TV and said, it's Russia. It can be no one else. It must be Russia. Now, Russia's foreign minister came on TV and said, the scientists that developed the weapon, yes, it was developed in Russia. But the man fled for the U.S. many years ago and patented it in the United States, which gave the U.S. government access to that weapon. So it's very easy to think that if the U.S. government has access to the weapon, U.S. allies, maybe Britain, they have access to the weapon as well. So it could have been done by anyone. So why
it could have been done by anyone pressed, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for calling us here tonight on Raw Politics, Your Call. So that's what Pressed thinks.
Well, it is, but this thing is that when it comes to Russia and it comes to intelligence, we don't understand how the intelligence agencies work. We know they've certainly got it wrong in the past. And so it does allow this kind of space for conspiracy theories or indeed for alternative theories to kind of grow. And there is always that about Russian involvement.
Yeah, I mean, it couldn't have been anyone. It couldn't have been anyone because it's such a sophisticated nerve agent that only a small number of state security agencies could have had access to it. And then there's the question of motive. I mean, why would another country want to execute a former Russian spy on British territory? And then there's the question of why were there two senior GRU military officers in the same town in the same place? So I am inclined to disregard some of the conspiracy theories.
They were
the cathedral,
church spies.
But let's be real here. I mean, and this is exactly what I think Russia thrives on, is just injecting this uncertainty into it. So it's kind of gaslighting. So we all kind of start to question what is clearly obvious, that this was a Russian attack, and squabble amongst ourselves on it.
And did Russia perhaps get a little bit scared off, do you think, Kathleen, from all the attention that was put on it?
Really? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think, but I personally think that they are playing a game of the past. Although with modern means, the way they intervene into our democracies and into elections, it's something to be really vigilant about and worrying, of course. But I think they are playing a game of the past. I think the future will be about other issues and not about these spies.
There you go, playing a game of the past. Well, thank you for that. And don't go anywhere. We'll be back in just a minute. We're just going to take a short break. But we're asking you tonight, should gender parity be mandatory in politics?
We've got a phone call on that very issue and also on the Holocaust coming up after the break.
The lines are open for about 9 more minutes, so get on the phones and call us here on Raw Politics, Your Call, here in the European Parliament in Brussels. See you in a sec.
Welcome back to Raw Politics, Your Call. Now, for the final couple of minutes of the programme, we're returning to this issue of this Holocaust game, which has been played in Greece. Escape rooms, I don't know if you played them or not. They are essentially puzzles set out in a kind of a game. In a room, compartment rooms which you need to try and escape physically from them. And there has been this Holocaust-themed one in Greece, which has branded itself as an entertaining adventure, but very much playing on the darkest episode of the Second World War.
So, Darren, let's go to Finn in London, who's standing by, and we want to ask you, Finn, essentially, are people forgetting the Holocaust, do you think, through these games?
Well, thank you for having me on. So first of all, I guess it's very important to note that it's obviously a very sensitive topic. And I myself have friends, colleagues, and even family members that are Jew. I think that, no, it is not forgotten. Yes, sometimes, and these are slightly derived issues, I think that I feel sometimes that we can no longer even make a joke, whether, sometimes very well intended, without being immediately characterized as anti-Semitic, or another sort of derived issue is often there's more and more confusion, it seems, when one criticizes, for instance, Zionism, which is a certain policy by the Israeli state, to immediately characterize that person as being anti-Jew. So I think there's a lot of branches to the issue, and my question for you is I guess, in return, are Jewish people, and that's already a generalization, which is already dangerous, but are Jewish people not able to tolerate any criticism at all, or, not even tolerate to sometimes be mentioned in a negative way? And
cool.
I think it all does come back to the Holocaust. So I know it's slightly derived, but thank you.
Thank you, Finn, for that. It is a point that, not just Finn, but other people have expressed previously in the past a lot as well.
It's an interesting point, and absolutely, obviously good to make that point. That's one of the issues that Labour is confronted with, and I'm not going to make the case of Labour, but what I want to say is it is absolutely legitimate to have criticism to the government in Israel, to what they do in the occupied territories, for instance. I'm the first to do so. But not make the connection with being anti-Jew. It's not being against the Jews or against the state of Israel when you have criticism to it. So I think that you need to disconnect these two issues. And second point is,
Kathleen, just hold that point there. I just want to bring in Thomas from Edinburgh, because I believe the time is ticking there. Thomas, thanks for joining us here tonight. Are people forgetting the Holocaust?
Hello, guys. Good evening. Hi. My name is Thomas. I'm calling from Edinburgh. Yes, I think people do forget about Holocaust. Yes, I have noticed that probably the true history facts have been throughout last years trying to be discolored. The true colors of history are not being presented as they were, I believe. I am Polish, and I have my grandparents. You have been trying to hide away and look after the Jewish family, and we have been helping. Polish people have been helping Jews, and now I hear that Polish people have been collaborators, and so on. For me, it's very emotional.
Very personal and very emotional. Well, Thomas, thank you so much for sharing your story with us tonight.
Thank you so much.
Here on Raw Politics Recall. Take care, and we'll see you again very soon.
It is those personal stories. That, as I say, that familial kind of knowledge is still there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Polish case is really interesting because it became such a big geopolitical issue, and I think there's a difference between saying that. I think there's the suggestion that by acknowledging the truth of collaboration by certain Poles with the Nazi Holocaust, that somehow implies some sort of national guilt, which is not the case. You have to face up to these facts. Clearly, what happened, the Holocaust happened in almost all countries with active collaboration from some citizens in those countries. And I think, there's no point in trying to brush that away. We have to face up to what happened.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree on that. It's a little bit the same. Don't blame a whole country and the citizens, but do take into account what went wrong. And the interesting thing is, because in the beginning you said, well, it's becoming to be disconnected. It's so long away, but still today, we don't know everything that happened over there, and still historians are writing the history.
Yeah, of course.
It's good that we can talk this tonight, and let's keep on doing that.
We are indeed, and reminding people of it and talking about it is in many ways the best thing we can do. But now it's time for tonight's last words. And actually, I'm going to give tonight's last word to the Russian embassy in the UK, who have been essentially issuing lots of tweets all day, attacking the coverage of the Salisbury attack. And they have tweeted out saying it turns out that even the closest relatives of those affected in Salisbury are still in the dark about what actually happened, and we have to seek the truth. And that involves from Russia. There you go. That's the view of the Russian embassy in London. And that is it for us for tonight. Thank you to our guests. We are back tomorrow night at the same time. Join us then. Thanks for watching and a very good night.